Good evening, Praise Chapel Fresno, and all those of you tuning in. We appreciate you tuning in. Wherever you're tuning in at, whatever you're tuning in on, we're just appreciative of you being here tonight. Let's not forget a few things that are coming up here. We do still have our food drive that is going on for our Feed the People ministry. Still needing some stuff to come in for that. So just if you're out shopping, if you can afford it, just pick up a few extra things, throw them in the can that's inside of our foyer. And let's just get that thing filled up. It's going to be for December. I believe that's what's going to be happening, is we're going to be putting stuff together and giving it out in December. But I mean, if we can just start now, every time we fill the can up, we're just going to put it aside, refill the can, just keep doing it. So any little bit helps that you have. Maybe there's something in your house that you have that you can spare. You know, just we're trying to get this put together and get this rolling. So I just appreciate everyone that has been giving so far and has put stuff in there. Thank you so much for that. If you want to continue to give, support this ministry, tithes, offerings, and love gifts can be given on Easy Tithe. It's a smartphone app that you can give on, or you can find it in the Apple Store and Google Play. You can also go to easytithe.com, search Praise Chapel Fresno, you'll see exactly which one you can give on. Or if you're joining us in our in-person services, we have envelopes behind each and every one of our chairs that's available to be filled out and drop off in our tithes and offerings box that's located just outside the sanctuary. If you're joining us in our online campus only and you don't give digitally, you can do so by mail or drop it off. If you don't know what our address is, just Google Praise Chapel Fresno of California. You'll see exactly which one you can give to. We'll make sure it gets deposited in a timely manner. So we're still going through these biblical biographies, these bios that we're putting together. Again, I'm finding a ton of stuff that is coming out from each and every one of these that I really didn't know that much about. It's stuff that we read, but when you go back and you actually research and you're going through and you're studying, you start finding some stuff that kind of just blew you away. I've had several people come up about, the Adam and Eve situation, about Noah, like these different things that people were going through that they're reading and they're researching, and it's helping develop not just their own knowledge of what's going on in the Bible with these specific characters, but also they're going through and researching even further into the implications beyond that. And that's a great thing to do. Always be knowledgeable about what's going on. And for those of you that have been asking questions or making comments, please keep doing so. That's how we learn. Some people can learn by hearing. Some people have to see it. Others actually have to get in and do something with it. So if you're one of those, just keep doing it. Keep asking questions. Keep asking for clarification. I'm ready to answer any questions that are out there. And if I don't know the answer immediately, I guarantee I'm going to get back to you in a couple of hours and let you know exactly what that was. But not after 10 o'clock at night. I do go to bed. I don't sleep that much, but I do go to bed and lay there frustrated. But don't text me late and say, hey, I didn't know about this. Text me in the morning. But today we're going to be doing Isaac. Only seems fitting that we did Abraham, and then now we're going to do his son Isaac. So the biblical reference between Isaac, which is really interesting because there is a lot of stuff that happens during Isaac's timeline that he's not even a part of. So I find it very, very interesting. He is a part of, his sons and the feud that happens there and what goes on, but he basically isn't even mentioned in most of these that are going on. He is involved to a degree because he's their father, but outside of that, not a whole lot happening with Isaac. And he's also known as a patriarch of the faith, but really doesn't have a whole lot going on throughout Scripture. He's mentioned a lot because he fathers Jacob, who will later be renamed by God, but he's kind of just the middle child of this story because he's important, he's part of the family, but yet there's not a whole lot mentioned about him. But let's just start. So the biblical reference I'm going through is Genesis 21, verse 2, and it goes all the way through Genesis 35, verse 29. That's his lifespan from when he's first mentioned to his death. So he's the second of the patriarchs of Israel and is the only son of Abraham and Sarah. So he's the result of Abraham's obedience to God, and Isaac, through his life, will also have to remain just as obedient. His name is literally translated to laughter, and that's because his mother laughed when she heard God tell this to Abraham, that she was going to bear a child. Not only was she barren, she's really old. She's beyond her years to give birth, and yet, so she laughs at it. He'll eventually become the grandfather to the 12 tribes of Israel. God will continue to reaffirm Abraham's promise to Isaac. So Isaac's story really does start in kind of an interesting way. So all throughout it, God is reminding Isaac of the promise made to his father Abraham. So I'm sure Isaac growing up heard it all throughout his life. His mom and his dad are, they're like, oh, you're the promise, and this is what it means. And I'm sure he got really sick and tired of it, but eventually God just continues to continue to remind him of what's going on. So his story starts in an interesting way. You find it in Genesis 21, verse 7. And it says, and she said, meaning Sarah, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet I have borne him a son in his old age. So literally like after he's born and he gets weaned from his mom like is telling everyone, who would think that this would happen? The promise of God does not follow that we would call the natural order. We talked about this on Sunday and also previous Wednesday, is that we always like to put God in the natural order and say this is the way it's supposed to happen when God works in the supernatural. Sarah previously states that she is beyond her childbearing years. She's no longer able, her body has changed. She has gone through menopause in her age. She's sitting there, she's saying, I can't even have this. So everything according to the natural order would tell Abraham and Sarah that the time has passed for God to fulfill his promise, and yet God created the natural order and keeps his promise with Abraham and Sarah through the birth of Isaac. So even when God is sitting there, and on Sunday we talked about this where Abram says, like, you've done nothing, I have nothing to continue my household on. He's not just saying that from a perspective of saying, I don't have a son yet. He's saying the avenue you've taken me down to have a son is closed off. And he's saying, like, she's beyond childbearing years, so not only have you been making this promise, but now you've taken away the avenue that the promise would come in. Isaac is somewhat kind of a picture of Jesus Christ when you think about it, the Messiah. So both were specifically promised sons. So God promises Abraham and Sarah, God promises Mary. Or he makes his promise that he'll send someone, but then comes to Mary. Both were miraculous conceptions. I mean, the fact that Mary, had never known a man, so she's a virgin and she gives birth. In this sense, we know that Sarah was not. She was not a virgin, but she was beyond those years. So God basically, both are miraculous births. Both were born after a period of delay. So when you look at the end of the Old Testament to the beginning of the New, there's this period where God stops talking. It's like 400 years, I believe, that he stops talking. So there's this period of delay of people not really getting anything from God, but kind of just following their religious day-to-day activities. And then, Jesus Christ comes. In this sense, Isaac was delayed for about 100 years. He's about 75 years from the time that he's originally promised to the time that he's born. Both were given names of significant meaning and before they were born, and both births occurred at God's appointed time, not at man's appointed time. Then let's look at verse 24 and 62. So when I'm going through these bios, what I'm doing is I'm picking out scriptures. I'm not going through entire scripture. I'm picking out specific verses that kind of show the attributes or are showing the formation of the character in the Bible. So there's a lot that goes on in between this of what Isaac is doing, but they really don't speak to his character. It's just kind of like his day-to-day stuff and what he does. So I'm going after verses that are specific to character. So this scripture right here is Abraham has sent out his servants to go find Isaac a wife, and they followed that. And so his servants are on the way back with Rebekah, who Isaac will marry. But this is how the verse starts. It says, now Isaac had returned from Beer Lahai Roi and was dwelling in Negeb. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward the evening. And he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, the camels were coming. So he's out there. The servants have got Rebekah on a camel. They're coming back. So this is when he sees it. So this is the first mention of Isaac since his near-death experience. So before his dad tried to kill him and burn him as a sacrifice, that's the last time Isaac is mentioned up until this verse. So that's a significant amount of time that goes in between here where Abraham is about to kill him, and then Isaac is just no longer mentioned. And then there are things that Abraham talks about to his servants about Isaac, but Isaac isn't even referred to until we hit this verse here. As far as the Bible is concerned, nothing of note happens between the angel preventing his death and this verse where he's about to meet his prospective bride, Rebekah. But that doesn't mean that Isaac wasn't doing anything at this point. We know that Isaac was still just as faithful as his father, just as obedient, and I'm sure there are multiple tests he's having to go through for this. But he would go out into the field He's consistently spending time with God. When it mentions the term meditate and the time of day it was, that's letting us know that there was a specific time that Isaac would always go and do this one thing. So always as the sun was going down, he would go out into the fields and he would just isolate himself. And it says meditate, but he's focusing on God. He's trying to get God, or he's trying to see where God wants him to take this. So after Isaac marries Rebekah, they also find out that much like Sarah, Rebekah is barren. She can't have children as well. So not only is Isaac a child of promise, he's given a woman who is in fact just like his mom in a sense that she can't have children, and she wants him to conceive children. But something that's interesting about Isaac is only ever mentioned around Rebekah, the woman. He's never mentioned around other wives, other concubines, anything like that. He's never mentioned. It's always just Rebekah. So there was never a period where Isaac sat and him and Rebekah were trying to figure out a way that this was going to happen. This is what Isaac does to try to solve his problem. What Sarah and what Abraham did was they tried to have a child in the sense that it was through Hagar, the servant that was there. So they attempted their own way. This is how Isaac tries to, and this is what speaks to his character. Genesis 25:20, when it says, "And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah his wife conceived." Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sure Abraham was telling Isaac about the horrible things that had happened, with Hagar, with all this. And he knows it's his half-brothers out there. He doesn't like them, all these kind of things. So he knows this. But I'm sure there was a lot of warning that went into that. But still, it doesn't say that Isaac and Rebekah tried to find a way to conceive or that it was going. Isaac took it directly to God and gave it to him. And God honored the obedience and the faithfulness that Isaac displays by impregnating Rebekah. But impregnates her with 2 children, with twins. She has problems all throughout her pregnancy. So even though Isaac has to face the same trial that his father did, the promise of God is based on the lineage. So Isaac would be looking at this and saying, well, if my father is supposed to be a father of great nations, I'm only one child, and if my wife can't have children, that means it ends with me. So he would be following the same thing. So the son of promise didn't just walk into the promise. He didn't just be the son of promise and God give him everything that he wanted. He still had to prove his faithfulness and his obedience. And God never comes to Isaac and tells him that his wife will eventually give birth. They do that with Sarah. God does it to Abraham and Sarah and tells him she will bear a child. God never does that with Isaac. Isaac goes before God and prays. And it's not like he just goes the first time and prays and God goes, okay, there you go. I'm sure that there are multiple times that he's going before God because he was being tested much like his father was to reveal his faith. God was going to honor Abraham's faith and obedience, but that doesn't mean that Isaac would just be given the same blessing without the same amount or even more obedience and more faith in God. And let's look at verses, it's 26, 12 through 13. And Isaac, excuse me, hold on. I jumped over one, I'm sorry. Genesis 26 is verses 2 and 3. So what happens here is a famine comes about, and Isaac, much like his father in their time when a famine had hit, Abraham and his family, they just pack up and they go to Egypt. Because Egypt, there was food, there was water there. So Isaac at this point, when the famine hits, he's just following the old Abraham playbook. He's like, okay, famine equals pack it up, let's go to Egypt. But God does this, 26 verses 2 and 3. It says, "And the Lord appeared to him and said, 'Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I will show you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. For you and to your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father.'" So Isaac could have walked right out of the promise of God had he gone to Egypt, even though he's following the same playbook as his father Abraham. They usually would travel to Egypt, but God tells Isaac, don't do it. Stay here. Go. I'm going to show you a land where I want you to go. God wanted Isaac, the son of the promise, to stay in the promise. So see, he could have went to Egypt and things could have gone wrong there. So God says, you know what? I'm going to take you out and I'm going to put you in a different place. So yes, he's following the same thing that his father would do, but that doesn't mean that God is going to move in the same way that he moved with Abraham. He's going to move differently with Isaac. he could see that God was, excuse me. Okay, now let's look at verses 12 and 13 of this. So Isaac is in this land, and then he starts doing really well. And this is what happens. It says, and Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. So he sows, and he gets 100% back of what he did. The Lord blessed him. The man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. So he honors God, and he knows that there's going to be this promise that's going to be fulfilled, but he also knows that if he turns and he follows God, that God's going to bless him regardless, and that God's going to bless the honor that he gives. So he reaps, or he sows into the land, and he reaps back 100-fold. So Isaac's blessing came after his obedience. We also talked about that on Sunday. Some people want the blessing before sacrifice. God blesses him so greatly that people begin to envy him. They also begin to fear him because the wealthier you were, the more powerful you became. So there's some concern around the surrounding cities that Isaac is becoming somewhat of a wealthy fellow. And they don't want to have to face him and fight him because they also see not only is he blessed greatly and he's becoming very wealthy, but there's something that's not natural about what's happening to Isaac. That'd be like someone going out and planting 10 seeds for 10 trees and 100 trees spring up. They know something's not natural here, and they know that God is working through Isaac. So their concern is not only is he great and powerful and wealthy, but he's also clearly under the protection of a mightier power. A few verses later, this man, Abimelech, is going to come to him. An evil man, and he wants Isaac out of his land. But a few verses later, he's going to come back and he's going to ask not only for peace between them two, but he's also going to ask for a blessing. He could see that God was with him, and he begins to fear retaliation. So I sent this man off this land, and see, his concern was the blessing was in the land. And I ushered him off the land, and I told him to leave. But again, Abimelech isn't understanding that the blessing isn't in the land, the blessing is with Isaac. That no matter where he goes, God is going to bless the land that he's on. He could see that God was with him, feared retaliation, but Isaac doesn't respond to this evil man with evil. He responds to this evil, he blesses his enemy, and then God blesses Isaac even more. And then let's look at verses 27, 1 and 2. It says, so this is at a point where we're going to start seeing Jacob and Esau. So Jacob and Esau are the sons of Isaac. They were in Rebekah's. And so God comes to Rebekah, and this is why it's not, and I'm going to do Rebekah separately because it's quite interesting what she goes through. But God tells Rebekah that your younger son will rule the older. And Esau is born first, but Jacob is holding on to his heel, and he's born right after him. But verses 1 and 2 of chapter 27 says, when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, my son. And he answered, here I am. He said, behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. So Isaac knows that Esau is the true, or what he would consider the true heir of everything that Isaac has, because he's the oldest son. That was rabbinical law. That was just Jewish tradition. Was the oldest son was the one who took up what his father did and ruled the household after his father's death. So Esau was the oldest of the twins when they were birthed. So by Jewish custom, Esau was Isaac's heir. But God had previously told Rebekah that had previously told Rebekah that Jacob is going to rule Esau. Isaac is rejecting this kind of spiritual wisdom and thinking only of himself, but Rebekah had her favorite, and she goes to Jacob, and they concoct this thing of they're going to trick the father into blessing Jacob over Esau. They're gonna take this blessing. They're successful as Jacob is blessed by his father. That doesn't end the ordeal, though. Esau returns after his blessing, and this is kind of like another one of those seconds that kind of gets to me. Because in my childish brain, it's like after Isaac blesses Jacob, and the assumption is, well, Jacob just takes everything and goes. Well, Esau returns. His dad tells him, go out and kill something, cook it for me, bring it in here so I can eat, and then I'll bless you. But then Rebekah and Jacob, they do this little thing, they create the same thing, they give it to him while Esau is out fighting. And then just as Jacob is blessed, Jacob like walks away and Esau basically walks in. And then we get this in verses 32 and 33 of chapter 27. It says, his father Isaac said to him, who are you? He answered, I am your son, your firstborn Esau. So after he gives it, Isaac's like, who are you? What's going on? And he says, I'm your son Esau. And then it says, then Isaac trembled very violently. And he said, who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate it all before you came, and I have blessed him. Yes, and he shall be blessed. So Esau returns and kind of scares his dad. But when I pulled apart this vicious trembling, this violent trembling, the more apt translation, the better translation of it would be kind of shaking convulsively. He's so angry because he now realizes what's happened. Isaac is overcome with a deep sense of trouble that something has gone wrong with his plans. Even though it appears that Jacob has stolen Esau's birthright, it was God who chose Jacob over Esau. Isaac realized that he would always lose when he tries to resist the will of God. Isaac doesn't back down, though. Isaac doesn't back down. He keeps that blessing because he obviously knows, okay, now Rebekah says that he was chosen by God to rule, but Jacob's Rebekah's favorite, and his favorite is basically Esau because he says, you cook the best meals, you hunt the best game, and he knows that Esau is stronger. He remembers what God had decided. He doesn't reverse his decision, and he even tells Esau, I already blessed your younger brother, and you're going to serve him. I'm going to be honest. I don't think my older brothers would be happy if something like this had happened, where the baby brother is ending up, ruling over this because it is along that birthright status. Esau, even though people will say, well, Esau sold his birthright to Jacob back when they were kids over some bread and some lentil soup. Like, calm down, I'm going to get there a couple weeks from now. But it's at a point that Isaac is going to bless his son, and God is going to honor that blessing. But God shows Jacob, Rebekah figures that out, and she makes it happen between Jacob and Isaac. But Esau is upset. Esau is mad. And when we do Jacob and Esau, you'll actually see what happens there and what Rebekah does to save the baby and all this kind of stuff. Like it gets kind of crazy between those two. So I'm going to do those two together because their stories go hand in hand, and it would be weird to talk about Jacob without talking about Esau, or talking about Esau without mentioning Jacob. So Isaac would live 180 years old, but when he dies, Jacob returns from basically his hiding, and him and Esau, they bury their father, and they kind of like reunite at that point, but there's still feelings hurt because of the sense that Esau sees or feels like Jacob has stolen everything away from him. So what can we learn from Isaac? The first thing we can learn from Isaac is don't go when God says no. Isaac was just following his father's playbook. Famine, pack up, go to Egypt. And God tells him no. Now, Isaac could have just very simply said, well, this is the safest thing for me and my family. We're in this famine. We don't know how long it's going to last. I know Egypt has food. I know it has water because I've been there before during a famine. We're just going to go there. But he doesn't. God doesn't even tell him where he's going to go. He just says, I will show you to a land. So again, this is on faith and obedience that Isaac is willing to just pack up his family and probably go the opposite direction of Egypt, to where all of his household is like, wait. Last time this happened, Isaac, we went this way. And he leads them all to a place that God calls them. What we learn from this is God does not always say yes. But if you follow where he's leading, he's taking you to a land of blessing. Now, do you think that when they're in this famine, as they're traveling, they didn't have to endure hardships and trials? We already know there's very little food and there's very little water in the area. So they're having to pack everything up they have and walk out into another portion of wilderness, hoping that Isaac is really hearing from God at this point. God doesn't always work the same way with everyone. And sometimes a lot of Christians will falter in their faith because they'll ask someone, well, how did you do this? How did you do that? They tell you how they did it. You tried the same way and you fail. And you say, then it must not be real. No, God isn't going to do or move the same way through one person as he is through you. You have to seek out his voice. You have to look for his will on your life. But don't go when God says no. The second thing, your blessings will draw out enemies. Not everyone is going to be excited about what God is doing for you. God began to bless Isaac, and it says people became very envious and fearful of what God was doing through Isaac. There are these people that just do not want you to succeed. They're not going to be happy about your blessing, but the Bible tells us that they may be evil and they may, say horrible things about what you're calling a blessing of God, but one day they'll turn to you. One day it says they may return and may even ask for your help. May even say, I want peace between us. I don't want this anymore. Or you're obviously, something is going right in your life and I want that. God says that we respond to that with peace and with blessing. But your blessings are going to draw out your enemies. Number 3, favoritism creates conflict. Each parent had their favorite. Isaac loved Esau more than Jacob. Rebekah loved Jacob more than Esau. And these boys knew it when they were growing up. Come on. I mean, if we're all to look back, when we were kids, we could all sit there and say, we know who the favorite was in the family. Like everybody says that, oh, he's the favorite. He's this, he's that, he's this. Like everybody knows this. So these two boys knew this somehow. God didn't favor Jacob over Esau when he made the promise that Jacob would leave. The promise was made even prior to their birth, even prior to her pregnancy. It was made, hold on, no, I take it back. She was pregnant already when God made this promise to her. So it could have been Jacob born first and Esau later. God made the promise, the younger will rule the older. So Rebekah was just following it. If Esau had been younger, Esau would be the one that would carry it. But it happened to be Jacob. So God wasn't playing favoritism and said, the one you call Jacob will lead. He says, the younger one will rule the older. God's foreknowledge knew that Esau would despise his birthright, have little to no self-control, would take wives from a forbidden people, which is kind of, forbidden. And he would take these wives from these forbidden people. So what we see here is if we were to follow this today, and we have those people in our church that are our favorites, like we already know that once you kind of seclude yourself away from it, and once you kind of get in your little group of your Christians, that there are other people that see that, and it begins to create conflict. Why do they spend so much time with them? Why does this happen? Why does that happen? So favoritism creates conflict. Jesus Christ died for the entire world, not just a specific group of people. Number 4 is pretty easy. Submit to God's will. At every step, when Isaac felt like this was the will and God turned and said, that's not what it is, I want you to do this, Isaac immediately changed and followed God's will. Esau, by birthright, was the rightful heir to his father, even though God had told Rebekah that the older shall serve the younger. But Isaac's attempt to assert his own will over God's will puts the two brothers against each other. When we attempt to assert our own will over God's, we are always going to create collateral damage. There are always things we're going to have to face when we try to assert our will over God's will. That's a given. And no one's going to escape that. Like people may think like, oh, well, I did this and nothing happened there. Trust me, something happened. And we always face the outcomes when we put our will over God's will because it always creates damage. It's never good. Always creates damage. So that's Isaac. So there's basically four characters that are really important through this portion of Scripture. It's Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Esau. So those 4 have to be pulled apart individually because each one of them has their own kind of lineage and story that goes with it. But Jacob and Esau, I will put together. So it'll just be Rebekah and Jacob and Esau that we'll do separately. But again, it's interesting stuff that's going through. And just like those things that when I'm studying and when I'm reading, it just never occurred to me. I'm like, yeah, Esau had to return because he's doing what his father told him to do. And my assumption was that when Jacob takes the blessing, the story just immediately goes to where God renames Jacob, but it doesn't. You know, it's Esau comes back, Isaac figures out what they did, and then he dies at 180 years old, and it takes place, or a whole other thing begins to take place after that. So remember, keep getting our dry goods or non-perishable foods that we have for our food drive. It's going on for Feed the People. Remember, you can continue to give tithes, offerings, love gifts. You can do that through Easy Tithe, smartphone app that you can find in the iStore and Google Play. You can also go to easytithe.com, download the app, or even just give through there. Just search Praise Chapel Fresno. You can go to praisechapelfresno.com, click Give in the menu bar, and it's going to take you to a third-party website we're contracted with safely and securely. If you're joining us on our in-person services, there are envelopes behind each and every one of our chairs that you can fill out. Drop it off in the tithes and offerings box located just outside the sanctuary. Or if you're joining us on our online campus only, you can mail in or drop off your tithes or offerings if you're not comfortable using the digital formats, and we'll get it deposited in a timely manner. If you don't know what our address is, just Google Praise Chapel Fresno, California. You'll see our address. You can get in there. We'll get it deposited in a timely manner. Start texting people right after this. Start letting them know church is happening on Sunday. You need to come. I know that there were a ton of people sick. I got so many text messages last Saturday. I really do appreciate those. I love that you guys reach out and you say, hey, Pastor, I'm not going to be in. You know, I completely am okay with that. And I know no one wants to get around sick people. It's holidays are coming up, and it is like flu season is going to be bad this year. I'm going to tell you guys that already. You need to brace for that. If you do get your flu vaccines, if that's something you choose to do every year, you might want to start looking at that. But the flu is going to be a bit harsher this year. We've already been kind of seeing it in hospitals and things like that, so just be aware of that. But thank you for tuning in, and just text people like if they're feeling sick or they need to stay home. But if they're not, like get them in church, get them to where the fire is burning so they can begin to feel what God is doing. And it's easier to sit around and look at what's happening than sit at home and try to get a picture of what's going on inside the church. So get them in church and let them feel what's going on. Let God move through their lives. But we'll see you guys Sunday, live casted or in person here at the church. We'll see you guys then. We love you.